Deep inside a dying forest, something is happening that most people will never see. And once you understand what it really is, you will never look at a rotting tree the same way again. Beneath the bark of a single fallen giant, an empire of tens of thousands of soldiers is carving out tunnels with a level of precision that puts human engineering to shame. And above them, a hunter the size of a crow is about to tear that empire apart with nothing but a beak, raw force, and an almost supernatural sense of hearing. By the end of this video, you will understand why one of North America's most feared insect colonies stands almost no chance against a single bird, and why this quiet, brutal relationship, playing out inside dead and dying trees, keeps the entire forest running. This is the story of carpenter ants and the pileated woodpecker, and it begins not with a battle, but with wood that is already dying. Every forest in North America is full of trees that look alive on the outside, but are already dead on the inside. Storm damage, fungal rot, old age, and insect activity slowly hollow out the heartwood of oaks, pines, maples, and firs, turning solid trunks into something closer to a sponge. This decayed wood is soft, moist, and structurally weak, and it is exactly what carpenter ants are looking for. Unlike termites, carpenter ants do not eat wood for nutrition. They excavate it, chewing through the softened fibers and carrying the debris out of the colony in small pellets that pile up at the base of the tree like sawdust. Their real diet is protein and sugar, harvested from other insects and from the sweet secretions of aphids they farm on nearby vegetation. But their home, their fortress, is built entirely inside the dead heart of the forest itself. A mature carpenter ant colony is not a simple nest. It is a multi-chamber network that can stretch for several feet inside a single trunk or root system, connecting to satellite colonies in nearby stumps and fallen logs. At the center of this network lives the queen, who can survive for over a decade, laying thousands of eggs over her lifetime and building a workforce that, in the largest colonies, can exceed 50,000 individuals. The workers are divided by size and function, with smaller ants tending to the brood and foraging for food, and larger, heavily armored major workers defending the tunnels with powerful mandibles capable of delivering a painful bite and spraying formic acid as a chemical weapon. Inside these tunnels, the temperature and humidity are carefully regulated, the chambers are kept clean of waste, and the entire structure functions less like an insect nest and more like a self-sustaining underground city. Except this city is built inside a hollow tree. For years, a colony like this can expand almost undisturbed. Few predators are equipped to break through solid or semi-solid wood to reach the ants hidden inside. Most birds can only pick at ants that wander onto the surface of the bark, getting a handful of stragglers at best. But one predator in the North American forest has evolved specifically to solve this problem, and it does not wait for the ants to come out. It goes in after them. The pileated woodpecker is the largest woodpecker species in the United States and Canada, a crow-sized bird with a flaming red crest, a body built like a feathered sledgehammer, and a skull engineered by evolution to survive repeated high-speed impacts that would cause severe brain trauma in almost any other animal. Its beak is chisel-shaped and reinforced, capable of striking wood at speeds and forces that generate deceleration equivalent to over 1,000 times the force of gravity on every hit, and its skull absorbs that shock through a combination of spongy bone structure, minimal fluid space around the brain, and a beak that flexes slightly to redirect impact energy away from the cranium. This is not a bird that pecks at wood out of curiosity. It is a bird that treats solid timber the way a demolition crew treats a condemned building, and its primary target, more often than any other food source, is the carpenter ant colony hidden inside. What makes the pileated woodpecker such a devastating predator of carpenter ants is not just brute strength. It is precision hunting built on extraordinary sensory ability. Woodpeckers can detect the faint vibrations and even the sounds produced by insect movement and feeding activity deep inside wood, allowing them to locate active galleries before a single strike is made. Once a colony is located, the bird begins excavating with sharp, controlled blows that strip away bark and softened wood layer by layer, exposing the ant tunnels one chamber at a time. Where a smaller woodpecker might peck a shallow hole and give up, the pileated woodpecker can carve out rectangular openings up to a foot long and several inches deep, sometimes going so far as to nearly topple an already weakened snag in the process. This is not subtle. Wood chips fly, bark peels away in sheets, and the loud, resonant drumming echoes for hundreds of yards, turning what looks like a stealthy ambush into something closer to a demolition. When the tunnels are finally breached, the ants respond exactly as any defended colony would, mobilizing major workers to the breach point, releasing alarm pheromones that summon reinforcements, and preparing to bite and spray acid at anything that enters. Against most other predators, this defense works. Against the pileated woodpecker, it barely slows the attack down. The bird's tongue is one of the strangest and most effective tools in the animal kingdom, extraordinarily long, barbed near the tip, and coated in sticky saliva, and it can extend deep into the exposed galleries far beyond the reach of the beak itself. Once inside the tunnel network, the tongue sweeps through chambers, and the barbs combined with the sticky coating allow the bird to extract dozens of ants in a single pass, workers, larvae, and pupae alike, pulling them out of the one place they believed was safe. The queen, if the breach reaches deep enough, is not spared either, and losing her ends the colony's future entirely, regardless of how many worker ants survive the attack. A single feeding session can consume thousands of ants, and a hollow colonized log within a woodpecker's territory becomes a resource the bird will return to again and again, methodically working through the structure over days or even weeks until the colony is functionally destroyed or forced to relocate. This is not an occasional supplement to the pileated woodpecker's diet. It is often the foundation of it, with carpenter ants and other wood-boring insects making up the overwhelming majority of what the species eats throughout the year, especially in winter, when soft fruits and other food sources are scarce, and the fat, protein-rich ant colonies buried in dead wood become one of the few reliable calorie sources left in the forest. The relationship between these two species goes far beyond a simple predator eating prey, because both of them are shaping the same forest in ways that ripple outward to nearly every other species living there. Carpenter ants, by hollowing out already weakened wood, accelerate the breakdown of dead trees, cycling nutrients back into the soil and creating structurally softened cavities that other species can exploit later. Their tunnels increase moisture penetration, which invites fungal growth, which further breaks down the wood, an underground demolition service running on a schedule measured in years rather than days. Without carpenter ants and other wood-boring insects doing this work, dead trees would stand far longer as inert, biologically inactive structures, slowing the entire nutrient cycle of the forest. The pileated woodpecker, in turn, does not just eat the ants, it physically reshapes the tree in the process. And this is where its ecological importance becomes almost impossible to overstate. The large rectangular openings it creates while hunting, along with the deeper nesting and roosting holes it carves into snags each year, do not disappear once the bird moves on. These abandoned chambers become some of the most valuable real estate in the entire forest ecosystem. Wood ducks, owls, and a wide range of songbirds cannot chisel out spaces of their own and depend entirely on holes made by woodpeckers, and the pileated woodpecker's holes are large enough to be used by species that no other woodpecker in North America can accommodate. Flying squirrels den in these hollows. Bats roost in the crevices left behind. Even black bears have been documented using pileated woodpecker excavation sites, enlarged over time by other animals, as denning locations. In this sense, the very act of hunting carpenter ants generates housing infrastructure for dozens of other species, making the pileated woodpecker what ecologists call a keystone species, an animal whose influence on its environment is dramatically larger than its numbers alone would suggest. This entire system depends on something modern forests are losing at an alarming rate, which is dead and dying wood left standing rather than removed. In managed forests and residential areas where dead trees are routinely cut down for safety or aesthetics, both carpenter ant colonies and the woodpeckers that hunt them lose the specific habitat this relationship requires. Fewer standing dead trees means fewer ant colonies, which means less food for pileated woodpeckers, which means fewer cavities carved out at all, which means fewer nesting sites for the dozens of other species relying on those holes. Pulling one thread out of this system does not just affect two species. It collapses a housing and nutrient cycling network that an entire section of the forest depends on. and it is a quiet reminder that what looks like decay and death in a forest is very often the opposite, an engine actively creating the conditions for new life. Back at the colony, the outcome of any single woodpecker attack depends heavily on how large and how established the ant network truly is. A young, small colony discovered early can be wiped out in a single feeding raid, the queen killed, the workforce scattered and unable to recover. But a massive, long-established colony with satellite nests spread across multiple trees and root systems can absorb the loss of one breached chamber and continue functioning elsewhere. Workers sealing off the damaged tunnels with debris, relocating brood deeper into unaffected sections, and rebuilding gradually while the woodpecker moves on to hunt elsewhere in its territory. This is why the relationship is best understood not as a single decisive war, but as a long, repeating cycle played out across the same patch of forest year after year, the ants constantly expanding into every available piece of dead wood, and the woodpecker constantly returning to harvest whatever colonies grow large enough to be worth the effort. What makes this conflict so compelling is how completely mismatched the two combatants appear on the surface, and how deceptive that appearance turns out to be. Tens of thousands of armored soldiers, chemical weapons, and coordinated defense tactics look, on paper, like an unbeatable fortress. A single bird, however large and however hard it can strike, seems like it should not stand a chance against a colony that size. And yet, the physics of the confrontation tilt decisively in the woodpecker's favor, because the ants' entire defensive strategy depends on the walls of their fortress holding, and the pileated woodpecker was shaped by millions of years of evolution to do exactly one thing better than almost any other bird alive, which is break walls apart. Once the wood is opened, once the tunnels are exposed to daylight and to that long, barbed, unstoppable tongue, numbers and chemical defenses stop mattering, because the ants have no answer for an enemy that was never supposed to be able to get inside in the first place. This is the hidden war happening right now, in countless dead trees scattered across forests from the Pacific Northwest to the Appalachians, a war most hikers walk past without ever noticing, marked only by a scattering of fresh wood chips at the base of an old snag and a rectangular gouge in the bark above. It is a war with no winner in the traditional sense, because both species need each other to survive, the ants converting dead wood into a resource worth defending, and the woodpecker converting that resource into food, shelter, and, indirectly, homes for an entire community of forest animals that will never know the two species responsible for the roof over their heads. In the end, this is not just a story about an insect colony and the bird that raids it. It is a story about how destruction and creation are, in the forest, very often exactly the same process, seen from two different points of view.